In the far north of Italy, amidst the soaring peaks of the Alps, a chapel clings perilously to the mountainside. For centuries, pilgrims have made the arduous trek to this sanctuary from the valley below, drawn to its lonely location and ethereal appearance. But the history of this unlikely building is even stranger than you might imagine. A mysterious chapel hidden on a cliff 2,000 feet above sea level is steeped in supernatural secrets. According to legend, the chapel known today as Santuario Madonna della Corona was built in the 16th century when a bizarre miracle drew villagers to this remote spot. But in reality, its origins stretch back much farther into the past. According to medieval records, the site has been a place of religious significance since the 10th century AD. Around the year 1000, it's believed, hermits from nearby Verona traveled to the Monte Baldo region, where the Santuario Madonna della Corona now stands. Reportedly, they came from the Abbey of Saint Zeno, a place that would acquire its own fame centuries later as the reported site of Romeo and Juliet's ill-fated wedding. According to the sanctuary's official website, a monastery has existed on the site since at least the late 13th century. At that point, it was dedicated to Saint Mary of Montebaldo, an ode to the mountains that hem in the sanctuary on all sides. And in order to reach it, pilgrims had to ascend thousands of feet along a vertigo-inducing path. But why build a religious sanctuary in such an out-of-the-way place? Well, there are a number of legends that purport to explain the impractical location of the Santuario Madonna della Corona. According to one, everything began back in the 10th century when villagers living in the nearby Adige Valley witnessed a strange glow twinkling on the mountainside. After following the light, the story goes, the villagers found themselves among the peaks of Monte Baldo. And there, they found a mysterious statue depicting what is known as the Pietà, a scene in which the Virgin Mary is seen cradling the body of Christ. Impressed with the artwork, they decided to carry it back down to the valley, where they could continue to admire it. The Pietà, though, had other plans. According to the legend, the villagers awoke the next morning to find that the statue was missing. And when they returned to the mountainside, they found that the heavy stone carving was somehow back in the spot where they had first stumbled upon it. Again, the villagers attempted to take the statue home, and again it mysteriously returned to its original location. Eventually, it seems, they gave up on moving it, choosing to build a sanctuary around it instead. And over the years, that building has morphed into the Santuario Madonna della Corona that we see today. But that's not the only legend concerning the unlikely chapel, which sits 2,000 feet above sea level. According to another story, the Pietà visible in the sanctuary today originally stood on the Greek island of Rhodes, more than 1,500 miles to the southeast of Monte Baldo. At the time, the region was a Catholic enclave, controlled by knights who had migrated there during the Crusades. Then, the armies of the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman I launched an assault on Rhodes, and the knights fled, taking their religious iconography with them. But not all of the island's artifacts were transported by human hand. According to the legend, the Pietà was miraculously teleported to Monte Baldo, perhaps by some kind of angelic or supernatural powers. Reportedly, this happened in 1522, the same year that Suleiman invaded Rhodes. And afterwards, a shrine was raised on the spot to mark the miracle of the Pietà. But this date contradicts evidence found by modern-day scholars, who point to a 14th century painting that can still be seen gracing the walls of the sanctuary. In fact, historians believe that the chapel's original name of Saint Mary of Montebaldo was probably linked to this 14th century artwork, which depicts the Madonna cradling baby Jesus. And that this, rather than the Pietà, was the first artifact worshipped at the site. But is there any truth at all to the legend of the moving statue? Well, despite the distance between the two places, there is a connection between the island of Rhodes and this remote spot halfway up a mountainside in rural Italy. After their expulsion from Jerusalem following the Crusades, the Knights of St. John, also known as the Knights Hospitaller, spread out across Europe. And although they made their base on the Greek island, they acquired property in several different countries as well. At some point in the 1430s, the official website reports, the Knights Hospitaller took control of the sanctuary on Monte Baldo. And almost 100 years later, they were forced to flee their seat of power at Rhodes. Might some members of the order have physically carried the statue to Italy, where they still wielded a degree of influence and power? Perhaps a more likely explanation of the Pieta's origins can be found on the statue itself. According to an inscription carved into the stone artifact, which is about 28 inches high and 22 inches wide, it was gifted to the sanctuary by a local nobleman in 1432. In other words, it was probably in place before the Knights Hospitaller even arrived in Monte Baldo. But even if the Santuario Madonna della Corona isn't really home to any teleporting statues, it remains a haunting and compelling place. And much of that is down to the actions of the various custodians who have preserved and renovated the chapel over the years, each adding a new chapter to its story. After the Pieta appeared in the chapel, whether by natural or by supernatural means, its name changed to the Santuario Madonna della Corona, the sanctuary of Our Lady of the Crown. And in 1490 the Knights Hospitaller constructed a new, much larger church on the site of the old building. Some decades earlier, the Knights Hospitaller had built a new bridge across the Adige Valley, improving access to the chapel. But it remained a remote and inaccessible spot, reachable only via a long and arduous hike up the pilgrim's path. Despite the challenge, though, pious travelers continued to flock to Monte Baldo, climbing steadily towards the holy sanctuary in the clouds. In 1625 the Knights Hospitaller, who would own the sanctuary for almost 400 years, began constructing yet another new church on the site. And finally, after 4 decades, the work was complete. Around the same time, a hostel was built into the mountain itself, with facilities to accommodate the many faithful who made the pilgrimage. Further alterations were made to the church in the late 1800s when the Veronese architect Giuseppe Magagnati renovated the building with the help of engineer Emilio Paer. Together, the pair extended the church and added a plethora of ornate marble decorations, many of which can still be seen today. Then, in the early 20th century, a number of works by the Italian sculptor Ugo Zanoni were added to the collection. In the 1920s a bell tower was added, its steeple pointing dramatically up towards the stars. Less than 2 decades later, Italy, like much of Europe, found itself caught up in the horrors of World War II. But even as Allied bombs devastated nearby Verona, razing almost half of its buildings to the ground, the sanctuary remained remarkably unharmed. Decades after the war, in the 1970s, another architect was tasked with expanding the sanctuary once more. This time, most of the original structure was demolished, although parts of it were preserved. In order to extend the church to cover almost 6,500 square feet, the architect carved into the very mountainside itself. In 1978 the new design was finally complete, and the Bishop of Verona arrived to mark the occasion. 4 years later, Pope John Paul II declared the sanctuary a minor basilica, one of fewer than 2,000 buildings worldwide, with special ceremonial significance to the Catholic Church. And 6 years after that, he visited the holy site for himself. But what exactly did the Pope see in the Santuario Madonna della Corona that made it worthy of such veneration and the long trek to reach it? Today, modern pilgrims wax lyrical about the site's picturesque location, nestled on a thin ledge of rock on the mountainside. In fact, many have described the church as suspended somewhere between heaven and earth. For the 21st century visitor, though, reaching the sanctuary doesn't have to be the challenge that it once was. In recent years, a route has been opened that allows less energetic pilgrims to park in the nearby town of Spiazzi and catch a shuttle bus to the site. But for those wanting the authentic experience, nothing beats the original path that has serviced this remote spot for hundreds of years. Sometimes, pilgrims start their long journey some 40 miles to the east, at the Pieve di Ciampo, a replica of the sacred grotto in Lourdes, France. The trek takes them across the Venetian pre-Alps, traversing several valleys before eventually reaching the path that leads up to the Santuario Madonna della Corona. Beginning in Brentino Belluno, a small town some 16 miles northwest of Verona, the pilgrim's path snakes up the mountainside towards the sanctuary. In total, it's almost 8,000 feet in length, rising to an elevation of nearly 2,000 feet. And along its course, walkers will need to conquer a grand total of 1,540 steps. In the era of Instagram and social media, the Santuario Madonna della Corona's dramatic appearance has made it more popular than ever before. And as a result, several blogs have sprung up offering advice to would-be pilgrims. Generally, they predict that it'll take between 90 minutes and 2 hours to complete the path and recommend an early start. In Verona, you see, temperatures can sometimes top 95 degrees Fahrenheit in summer, making the long trek up to the sanctuary even more of a challenge. But according to reports, it's worth every inconvenience to arrive at the church as originally intended, slowly witnessing it emerge, imposing, from the towering rocks above. But what is there to see at the Santuario Madonna della Corona, besides its impressive architecture and stomach-churning location? Apart from the Pieta, which may or may not have made a miraculous arrival at Monte Baldo, there are a number of attractions that fascinate both religious pilgrims and tourists alike. Take, for example, the chapel's Via Crucis, or Stations of the Cross. Found in Catholic places of worship around the world, these images, often taking the form of paintings or reliefs, depict the events surrounding Jesus' crucifixion. At the Santuario Madonna della Corona, they are arranged along a route, allowing visitors to follow the story as they walk. Here, the Via Crucis begins in Spiazzi and follows a paved road down towards the chapel, representing a third option for those approaching the sanctuary from the surrounding area. At each station, a sculpture by the Veronese artist Raffaele Benente recreates a different scene, a feat which took him nearly 35 years to finish. As a counterpoint to the Via Crucis, the sanctuary is also home to the Via Matris, or Way of the Mother, a similar convention that pays homage to the Virgin Mary. Here, the sculptures were made by Zanoni, the Veronese artist we mentioned earlier. And his work can be seen scattered across the site, carved in grey Carrara marble that echoes the shade of the rock itself. At the end of the path, a gallery has been carved into the mountainside, where pilgrims stop to light candles in prayer. And from there, the road opens out onto the sanctuary itself. En route to the main church, visitors will find the Chapel of Confessions, home to the 14th century fresco which many believe was the first artifact revered here. It's in the Chapel of Confessions, as well, that the Scala Santa, or Holy Stairs, are located, a replica of the flight that once stood in Pilate's palace in Jerusalem. According to the Bible, these steps were ascended by Jesus as he made his way to face trial during the period of his life known as the Passion. According to legend, the original Scala Santa was relocated to Rome in the 4th century AD. But several copies have sprung up around the world, including the one at the Santuario Madonna della Corona. Here, pilgrims are invited to follow in the final footsteps of Jesus, stopping for prayers along the way. Inside the main church, meanwhile, visitors stop to marvel at the intricate stained glass windows, each depicting the mysteries of the Rosary, a series of meditations on Jesus' life. Meanwhile, high up above, a peal of fine bells, cast in Verona in the 19th century, ring out through the clear mountain air. Elsewhere in the sanctuary, a collection of ex voto, or votive offerings, offer an insight into the history of this fascinating region. Comprising over 150 stone tablets, they date from the mid-16th century onwards and typically reflect miraculous stories of survival. For example, one recounts the tale of a woman who was saved from drowning in the Adige River. For those visiting the sanctuary today, its long and storied history feels tantalizingly close. Looking out across the rooftops and over the Adige Valley, the view has changed little since the first hermits settled here 1,000 years ago. In fact, parts of them remain here still, stored in glass urns in a makeshift burial ground. Eventually, though, even the modern pilgrims leave, boarding shuttle buses or climbing the steps that lead the way back to Spiazzi. Or, they turn and come back the way they came, meandering along the winding path that descends towards Brentino Belluno. But whichever way they choose to return, the image of the Santuario Madonna della Corona clinging to the mountainside will remain with them for many years to come. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.